Just to check we're on the same page here, think of doing a teaser for the Quicycle Society. So what I intend to do is try and take you through how the universe works, the whole thing. What I'm going to try and talk about is something which has been a passion of mine ever since I left school, which is trying to understand how everything works. I had a moment of inspiration when I thought that looking at the structure of elementary particles and the kind of processes that happened in terms of their transformation amongst each other, the things of which matter is made, electrons, protons and neutrons, can be created these days from just mere energy. By adding sufficient energy into a collision between two elementary objects, you can create many more. They simply arise, essentially bashing the rocks together, which is what humans have been doing all of this time. I worked in high energy physics, CERN in Switzerland, doing exactly that, banging rocks together, see what came out, see if we could analyse and learn about how stuff worked. If you bash the rocks together hard enough and use small enough rocks, you just get more rocks out than you put in. You create new matter. And in that process, the thing that struck me in part of that process is that, in particular, some of the elements of matter, one of the main elements of matter, the electron, the humble electron, if put in with its antiparticle, the positron, which is an antimatter counterpart of the electron, what happens? Take electron and positron, put them together, and they annihilate to give pure energy in the form of light, in the form of two photons. And likewise, you can produce some very high energy light and do what's called photoproduction, where photo is short for photon, production of particles where light goes into particles. So you can transform particles to light and light to particles if you just use enough energy. And what the inspiration was maybe these particles are made of light. Perhaps if light's what's going in, then perhaps what's inside the particle is light. The whole universe is made from just space-time and energy. You can understand how everything works in terms of 5 things. And yet, by taking that immense simplicity and then by turning it into a stupidly powerful mathematics, which a mathematics of reality, a mathematics that parallels the underlying way that the universe works. It's designed to do that. Step by step, that mathematics has become more and more potent at being able to take that simplicity and then generate from that simplicity all of the complexity of the whole universe around us. And I think what I should probably do is just explain what the quantum bicycle is. Let's go back to the beginning though. I met Martin van der Mark. He'd heard about my models, my attempts to find out how the electrons and elementary particles worked, and he was interested in that. So he arrived in my office one morning and said, "Hello, I'm Martin," in typical Dutch fashion, boom, handshake. And he said, "I've heard about your model, can you explain it to me?" So we sat down and I started explaining to it, and at the end of the day, we're still going through this stuff, and he was just listening. And then he came back the next morning and he said, "John, I really liked your model, but it's wrong because..." I love that. I love it when people are smarter than me about something, because you've suddenly got something to learn. This is what you want. You want people who just go beyond you. Anyway, so he was beyond me in understanding of localization of light. So he and I worked on it for a week. We then got permission from the management, actually, Andries Miedema. We had a day session with him on the very early stage of the model, and he gave us both carte blanche from the period that day until the day that I left Philips to work on this stuff. So what happened is we started working on the stuff I had, my previous passion, which was elementary particle stuff. And it's really amazing with this kind of guy, because like we're sitting in the room just now, and he's a smart guy. I have my talents. So we're both reasonably intelligent people, but it's like there's a third person present who's about 100 times more intelligent than either of you, because it's like he's got half the brain, and things emerge, and you're putting stuff together, and it's really the two of you, and you think, "What? That is fantastic." What doing that does for us, what does that do for us? It enables us, once we have that understanding, to think things, to imagine things, which then become real. You make stuff up, and then it happens. It's a wonderful process. The problem with Pivot is that it's an integral part of matter. any local matter close to pivot will just absorb it and integrate it as energy into the system. Just mop it up. So a reason that we might not have seen it is that if we do experiments in labs made of material, which we tend to do, then the lab will absorb pivot very, very rapidly, and you'll never see it because it's already there. And in fact, if we take this teapot here, in the theory, a quarter of that teapot would then be dark matter. A quarter would be the counterpart dual dark matter, a quarter would be electric, and a quarter would be magnetic field. But you never see it separately from the teapot, because the dark matter is there hiding in plain sight in this teapot. What's really happening, which is that we have a photon which is twisting. That twisted thing is encased in a... As we do that, we take that whole thing, which we now put in a bracket or in a sphere, and then we take that twisting thing and we make that twisting thing twist as it goes round an axis. We then take that twisting thing and we make it tumble. And these things are nested in the sense that the primary twist is along the photon direction. The secondary one is the thing that turns that photon into a torus as it comes round. And then the tertiary thing is that torus tumbles to cancel the magnetic field. Let me just try and say what an angular momentum density is. What is angular momentum? Well, let's just think about things back, starting with Newtonian terms, and go back to a couple of 200-300 years to how Newton would have thought of these things, but then do it in a more modern way. So first thing is, angular momentum is really momentum that's going round and round in circles. So something which is travelling with momentum, that's round and round in circles, is an angular momentum. So what I'm going to do is say what momentum is, and then say how that becomes angular momentum, and why that's a trivector. Well, first momentum. What is momentum? Well, if you look at momentum, you might say it's mv, mass times velocity. What's velocity though? Velocity, well, what is velocity? Velocity in the x direction is dx by dt. Now dx, an element in x, has a unit vector element, which is a unit vector in the x direction. And equally, if you have a four-dimensional space-time, the time has a unit vector in the time direction. So the division, the quotient dx, a little bit of space divided by a little bit of time, has the character of a space-time object, a 0, 1, if 1 is the x direction, a 0, 1 object. The momentum is a bivector in the sense that it has two components, and the vector has only one component. So a momentum in the x direction is in the 0, 1, is in the time x plane. It's a bivector. So if you have something which is a momentum in the x direction, you want an angular momentum, what you need to do to get the angular momentum is determine what the lever arm is of that momentum. And the lever arm of an x direction is perpendicular to the x direction. So if it's perpendicular to the x direction, it has a different index. So for example, it could be in the y direction. So then you have dx by dt cross a vector in the y direction. So you have an index in the one direction, the x direction, an index in the time direction, the 0 direction, an index in the perpendicular spatial direction. Of course, we're talking about something rotating about something. You have something which has three indices. An angular momentum is fundamentally, or an angular momentum density, is fundamentally a trivector kind of concept. If we want to talk about the intrinsic angular momentum, like Richard did, remember when we visited the University of York yesterday, if you want to have something intrinsic for that, then the intrinsic kind of thing there is an angular, is a three-component object. We're a long way forward in the 6 months since we really last sat down and had a proper talk. The process doesn't stop. It's an absolute, like an arrow heading straight towards the goal of understanding everything.